up, people? Welcome back to the channel. So the video that I want to talk about, like the five, I don't want to say the best, but in my personal opinion, these are some of the five best, hand loops in Yu-Gi-Oh. Now, like I understand hand loops have fallen a little bit out of favor because like a lot of decks have they have a lot of cards in the graveyard, so depending on what deck you're using it against, it kind of either helps them or doesn't hurt them at all. But for the most part, a hand loop is still extremely devastating, especially what happens after that. So let's so if you like what we do, please don't feel like subscribe. If not, it's all cool. We're trying to get to 500 subscribers. If you want to help us get there, go ahead and subscribe. We got once we get there, we will do we will be doing a giveaway, giving away 2 TCG player gift cards, and then doing a special tournament. Also, if you leave an interesting comment down below, I will be shouting you out in the video that'll be coming out pretty soon. So let's go ahead and get into the video. So another honorable mention I guess the honorable mention that I want to talk about is the Yata lock. I understand it's not really a hand loop per se, but I don't want to talk about hand loops without mentioning kind of the whole the whole Yata lock thing. Essentially, like what the Yata lock is, you try to get you either get your opponent in position where they have one or no cards in their hand, or maybe they have 2 cards and you have a couple of counters, and you essentially you use the pre-errata versions of the chaos the chaos ruler dragon. Chaos Ruler Dragon. I'm gonna put a picture of him up on the screen right now. But you use the pre-errata version of this plus the pre-errata version of Sangan and Witch the Black Forest to summon to pretty much summon to put yourself in a position where you could destroy everything on the board, leave an open board, and search yourself Yata-Garasu, summon Yata-Garasu, and attack your opponent and prevent them from drawing. And essentially that right there will either make them have no cards in their hand, depending on what's going on, 1 or 2 cards, and kind of give you a lot of control. So I kind of just want to make an honorable mention to that hand lock. But this video is mostly talking about hand loops. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the X-Saber loop. So X-Saber Gotham reads right here is you contribute 1 X-Saber monster to discard 1 random card from your opponent's hand. So even though this isn't really too hasn't been too prominent, back in the day, there's a lot of kind of random decks that would kind of focus on summoning X-Saber Gothams, get maybe get a 2 X-Saber monsters on the field, and then set 2 traps, get rid of 2 cards in your opponent's hand, and then that right there was kind of enough to kind of to kind of take control of the game. There was also a couple decks that would kind of focus on getting rid of almost every single card in your opponent's hand, but especially even in the modern day, people still kind of try to experiment with Gothams. But at the same time, it's kind of fallen out of favor, especially because the graveyard is a second deck, so that's kind of something that kind of prevents it from being good. But this will be this will be in my number 5 spot for good Yu-Gi-Oh hand loops, the X-Saber hand loop. At number 4, we'll be talking about the Gishki hand loop. To be honest, even though the Gishki hand loop can get all 5 cards in your opponent's hand, it is not always the easiest one to pull off because it is one of the more fragile hand loops. A lot of these hand loops kind of lose to cards like Drone Lockbird and Dimensional Shifter, but at the time that this was being used more popular as a hand loop, cards like that didn't exist. So even though it wasn't as consistent, it did kind of pay off to be able to pull this off. So I did kind of decide to put the Gishki hand loop at the number 4 spot. In the number 3 spot, I decided to put the Dark World hand loop because this is one of the more modern day hand loops that people actually try to use, but at the same time, not only in the mirror match, but in certain matchups where they kind of want cards in their graveyard, it doesn't do as much damage as as you want. And also at the same time, if you choose to do the hand loop version in this deck, you're not able to put as much pressure on your opponent, which is completely different from the last two decks I want to talk about. So the number 3 spot, we have the Dark World hand loop, and at number 4, I want to talk about the Gouki hand loop. I kind of went back and forth between the last 2 slots, between which one should be number 2, which one should be number 1. But to be honest, I kind of went and thought about the time that these cards came out, and to be honest, the Gouki hand loop was just so hard to deal with because it wasn't only just losing your hand, you also had to deal with the U-Link, and this is also, I believe this is before we had Nibiru and Dark Blue no more to kind of like handle some of these kind of like big boards and kind of like board breakers. This, I think the only card we could have had to use against this would have been like Sphere Mode. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments down below, but I think like Sphere Mode would have been like one of the better cards to be able to use. Maybe a Kaiju, but at the same time you're also kind of left with anywhere from 2, 1 to no cards in your hand, and you had to deal with a Tri-Gate Wizard that probably was going to negate whatever you were going to put down on the board. So the Gouki hand loop was just, it was just incredibly powerful, but at the same time you did have you did have a lot of like hand traps in the meta that technically could counter the card, that could counter the deck, even though there was just so many ways to get to the combo. So the number 2 spot, I decided to kind of put the Gouki hand loop there with the Gumblar Dragon, and the number 1 is the Wind Up hand loop. To be honest, the reason why this is number 1, it isn't because this is necessarily the better hand loop. I think if it was like which one's the hands down better hand loop, I would honestly say that the Gouki hand loop is better, because you could end on a way more oppressive board and be able to get rid of almost every single card. And like with the wind up one, you're just getting rid of cards and maybe ending on some type of rank 3, link 3, or some kind of like play like that. But for the time that it came out, you only had 2 counters to the card. You had Maxi and you had Effect Veiler, and a lot of these cards were extremely hard to like to get when the hand loop was extremely popular. A little later on in the Wind Up's lifetime, like it was easier. The Maxi got a reprint, and also the Effect Veiler got a reprint, but people were also running more control versions where they were running the Shockmaster lock like with the windups, and then they're running a little more back row, so like getting hit with hand traps wasn't as bad. But during the time that the hand loop was like kind of like more popular, a lot of people kind of didn't have access to some of these cards. So because of the time it came out, and because like essentially if you didn't have that card, you had no choice but to sit there and lose your entire hand. I'm putting the wind up hand loop as like one of the best hand loops ever released in Yu-Gi-Oh! If you have an idea of some better hand loops, and I know there's like a lot of more hand loops right now, but I'm kind of more concentrated on hand loops that took away 5 to 6 cards in your opponent's hand. I know there's a couple ones that take away maybe 2, 3, maybe 4, but I'm kind of concentrated more on cards that could take away your opponent's entire hand. So if you have more hand loops that have the ability to do that, let me know in the comments down below. Until then, peace out, and I'll catch you in the next one.